Arya, as well as our speaker, Dr. Simon Musgrave and Dr. Sam Haynes. Welcome to the Faculty of Humanities DigiTalk. And now I will handle the floor to our Dean to say a brief introduction about this event, and then I will introduce Sam and Simon. The floor is yours, Prof. Arya.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Prima Hadi. Good afternoon, Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, nama budaya, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Respected speakers, Dr. Simon Musgrave, Dr. Sam Haynes. Once again, my apology if I'm, pronouncing your name incorrectly. So welcome to the Faculty of Humanities. Respected Setup Committee, Dr. Prima Hadi Vijaya, just to let everybody know, just to remind you, Dr. Prima Hadi is the head of the Setup Committee, so I owe him a lot. So he plans this Faculty of Humanities Digital Talk very well, cooperating with Ibu Nisa and all the Setup Committee, and all the lecturers, the students who are joining this Faculty of Humanities Digital Talk. First and foremost, once again, on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and Udayana University, I would like to thank Dr. Simon Musgrave and Dr. Sam Haynes for being available to be the speakers of our digital talk. Okay, so we appreciate very much on the behalf of Faculty of Humanities. I mean, the topic that you are going to talk about is very interesting. Just to be honest, my very original idea about digital humanities that we would like to develop at the Faculty of Humanities is, most of our studies here, the research that we are running at the Faculty of Humanities are qualitative. Now, when I, read the topic of your talk today, so that is how we use the large data set for qualitative study. That's going to be very extremely relevant to our practice of doing research here. So we are gonna listen to you and learn from you how we can use large data set for qualitative study. So that's once again extremely relevant to what we are practicing here. So once again, I thank you, Dr. Simon Musgrave and Dr. Sam Haynes for being available for us here. So we're gonna listen to you and learn so much from you about how we use the large data set for qualitative study. Just to let you know, the Faculty of Humanities this year would like to try to develop and establish digital humanities. But to be honest, we don't know what it looks like. By the end of this year, so we don't know how we're gonna set up the digital humanity. So I believe, your talk will inspire us about what we're gonna do by the end of this year. So we invited several speakers before from Oxford and also from Australia. I can't recall the institution. And also our lecturers from the Faculty of Humanities, so who are doing digital humanities. So once again, the topic that you are going to present this afternoon, the topic that you are going to share with us is going to be very interesting and relevant to us, So my part will not be long. I'd love to stay with you, but so today at 1 p.m. local time here, my students going to defend their thesis. That is undergraduate thesis defense. So I'm the supervisor of both students. So I'm so sorry to miss the talk, but anyways, I have to join the examination board, let's say in five more minutes. So, but anyway, Dr. Prima Hadi and all the participants are going to stay with you, and then I will talk sometimes later with Dr. Prima Hadi about it. Probably we can have your slides when you finish with your presentation, then we can look at it, you know what I mean. But in the future, you know what I mean, we probably will contact you to help us set up the digital humanities at the Faculty of Humanities, if that is possible for us. And then, of course, Dr. Prima Hadi would like to help us to contact you and discuss further about what we're going to do for the digital humanities. Before I end my part, so once again, Dr. Simon Musgrave and Dr. Sam Hames, I thank you so very much for being with us and share your knowledge, expertise, experiences with us here. Dr. Prima Hadi Wijaya, I thank you so much for helping the faculty organize this digital talk. I appreciate it very much. All the participants, I thank you for joining the talk this afternoon. Okay. If any inconvenience on behalf of the faculty, I apologize for that. Once again, I thank you so much. Okay, I end my part with Paramasanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, nama budaya, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Pak Dede. So in 1 or 2 minutes, then I'm sorry, so I will have to leave the room. Okay, thank you, Pak Dede. Dr. Simon, thank you. Dr. Sam, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Arya, and also to the participants who are coming. Many of them are from our doctoral programs in linguistics, and some staffs in the faculty are also coming, and we thank you for attending this talk. And let me briefly introduce our speakers. The first one is Dr. Simon Musgrave. He was one of my PhD professors at Monash before, and his core expertise is intersection of linguistics and digital humanities, and he's one of the key figures that really crystallized my interest in computational linguistics at Monash. And he did his PhD at Melbourne Uni about Indonesian syntax, so he knows Indonesian. And now he's in charge as research support and training for a project about language data commons of Australia in the University of Queensland. And he's also the engagement and partnership manager. I hope that is correct, Simon, because that's on the webpage. And Sam Hames is also part of the Language Data Commons of Australia, and he has PhD in biomedical engineering, which is interesting because his research interest is in the use of computational approach to qualitative and interpretive inquiry. And he's now also research fellow at the University of Queensland, especially in computational humanities project. And we are looking forward to listening to this very interesting talk from the title. Looking forward to your talk. So without further ado, I will let Simon and Sam to give the talk. Time is yours, Simon and Sam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gede, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Pakdeen, for your kind words also. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're very grateful for the invitation, and I hope that you'll be interested in what we have to present. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land from which I'm speaking to you today. I'm on the unceded land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Sam? No? Sam's in a different part of Australia, but that's okay for now. We're, as Gede said, we're part of the Language Data Commons of Australia project. We therefore have an obligatory slide where we acknowledge the people who are funding this project. Our primary co-investment partners are the Australian Research Data Commons, and they get funding from the National Research Infrastructure for Australia NCRIS program. what we're going to talk to you about today is some research that we've carried out about what is unparliamentary language. This, I'll give you a very little bit of background about this. A little while back, a colleague of ours from the University of Queensland, Dr. Martin Schweinberger, was proposing to edit a special issue of a journal where he wanted to look at various aspects of bad language. Now, I know, as someone who knows a little bit about Indonesian, I know that Indonesians don't have bad language. You are all unfailingly polite and courteous people. However, we Australians are not quite the same. Martin spoke to us about whether we would be interested in contributing to his project, and I knew that Sam was interested in working with Hansard as a data source, and I thought it would be interesting to look at whether there was bad language which occurs in the Australian Parliament. This project also involved another colleague of ours from University of Queensland, Professor Michael Hoare, and Michael is mainly interested in pragmatics. So it fairly quickly became clear that we would be taking a fairly pragmatics-based view of this problem. So what we ended up looking at is unparliamentary language as a meta-pragmatic category. Now, I'll come back in a moment to talk a little bit about what meta-pragmatic means in this case. Then we're going to tell you about the data source, Hansard, the record of the proceedings of the Australian Parliament, and some of the problems that we encountered in trying to work with this as a data source. Methodologically, what we ended up doing is using a combination of methods, which is a dialogue between some very computational approaches, using all the resources we could of computational approaches to text, to uncover qualitative aspects of the data that we could investigate in detail and take an interpretative approach to that. And we'll illustrate that with a case study of how words about racism came to be part of unparliamentary language. And at the end, we'll briefly mention some future directions that we have for our research. The examples which we'll refer to along the way, some of them are quite long because they're chunks out of the debate in Parliament. There's a virtual handout which you can access using the QR code or the short URL that's there. So we'll just leave that for a second for people to take advantage of this. Okay. Move on. Meta-pragmatic, right? This is a big word. What does it actually mean? Pragmatics is the aspect of studying language which looks at how language is used. It looks at the kind of background knowledge and the contextual knowledge that people bring to bear when they're understanding the messages that are transmitted by language itself. What about unparliamentary language? Well, the Parliament of Australia and parliaments in the Westminster tradition, and in fact, I think most parliaments everywhere, have rules about how you can use language or what language you can't use. We've got a little excerpt here from the Guide to Procedures of the House of Representatives in Australia. The Australian Parliament has two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And as you can see, this lays down a procedure where if people think that the language that's being used is disorderly or offensive, they are entitled to appeal to the chair of the sitting and say, I don't like that. That's unparliamentary. And then it's up to the chair to decide whether, in fact, it does count as unparliamentary language or not. If the chair thinks it is unparliamentary, then they will ask the person who made the remarks to withdraw them. If they do not withdraw them, they can be asked to leave the chamber for a period of time. They can be sanctioned. So the judgment here is made by the chair of the proceedings, and they take account of the context. It's not necessarily a set of hard and fast rules that some things are okay and some things are not. In context, you may be able to say things that you wouldn't normally be able to say, but there is a general understanding around what is possible and what isn't. And that's where metapragmatics comes in. So when we're talking about metapragmatics, we're talking about the kind of knowledge we have, the knowledge we can make explicit, the knowledge we can consciously access about how language is being used. So how language is being used is pragmatic knowledge, and then the metapragmatic knowledge is being able to actually think about that and talk about that. And there are various aspects to this. So there's metalinguistic awareness, which is being able to think about language in itself as an object. And I suspect that for this audience, this is a very easy concept to manage because most of you speak more than one language, and you know that things are not the same in those different languages. That's metalinguistic awareness already. Similarly, we can have metacommunicative awareness. We can think about the communication we use around communication. So these are all levels of thinking about what we know that enables us to use language effectively. So how is this category of being unparliamentary? How is that metapragmatic? Well, for one thing, it's used to characterize utterances. You can look at a bit of language and say, is this unparliamentary or not? You can make a judgment about its appropriateness, about its pragmatic viability. And these judgments can be contested. Different people may have different opinions, and they can articulate those opinions. And if you look at example 1, you can see that happening. In this excerpt, Senator Canavan uses the word gutless, which is taken by the president of the Senate, who's presiding, the chair at the time. He takes that, he doesn't actually say it's unparliamentary, he just says, you should withdraw that. So he's indirectly making that judgment. He's saying, I don't think that's parliamentary language and I want you to withdraw it. But the senator doesn't agree. And he's able to articulate that at the level of metapragmatics. And he says, how is that unparliamentary? He loses the argument, but at least he can present his point of view. He can say, well, I don't necessarily agree with you. So this is the kind of level we're talking about when we're talking about the metapragmatics of unparliamentary language as a category. I think I've actually said everything that's on that slide, basically. Sorry, Sam, if you can just go back, except the last point, which is if we can find these kind of examples, if we're interested in this overall idea of metapragmatics and how unparliamentary works in that context, what we're interested in is finding good examples of that in data so that we can see how that bit of parliamentary discourse is working. So what we're looking for in the data is the specific examples where we see this kind of metapragmatic discourse. So our first problem here was, how are we going to find those? In a minute, we'll tell you just how big a data set we were looking at. And I think you'll then begin to realize that this is actually a genuine problem, that there's an awful lot of data and there may not be that many examples that we're really interested in. We're also, though, interested in the rich context within which these examples occur. So we want to know also, as well as the specific examples, we want to know about whether there are contexts where they're more likely to occur, and are there linguistic clues we can use to guide us to where they occur. So there's various things that we're looking for in the data, And then we had to try and figure out what were good methods that would allow us to find these things. How were we going to achieve these goals? We had a pretty good idea from the start that this was going to be a dialogue between automated, more or less automated processes and human mediated interpretive processes. So we had to figure out also how that was all going to fit together. Okay. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, and thank you for the welcome. So I'm talking about this specifically because before we even started this project, I'd spent 6 to 12 months just trying to sort out this data set. Because on the one hand, it had a lot of really, really wonderful materials, but it also raised so many practical questions before we could even start to do the things we wanted to. So just to talk briefly about the background, the reason we refer to this as Hansard is a holdover from British, and Australia as a former British colony has adopted many of Britain's parliamentary proceedings. So Hansard is actually named after a family of printers who produced the first official transcripts of parliamentary proceedings in the UK. In the context of Australia, it is actually really notable because the parliamentary library, we have a complete record from Australia's Federation in 1901 to the very latest sitting, and the Parliamentary Library for Australia has already done the job of optical scanning, digitizing, optical character recognition, structuring, everything. So you can look at the entire data set back to Federation, Australia's complete history as a country, and see what was transcribed in Parliament. I said what was transcribed rather than what was said, though, because one of the challenges is that these records are not necessarily what you'd expect. Notionally, they're the record of what was said in Parliament, but in practice, there's a lot of ways that that can be not what was actually said. The language normally used, at least in parliaments following the British tradition, is the recording is substantially verbatim, which is usually what was meant to be said, not necessarily what was actually said. So things, I know since many of you are linguists, you'll probably be interested in things like pauses and ums and ahs and other interesting markers of speech. Those won't be transcribed. Interestingly as well, parliamentarians can request corrections. So that might just be they simply misspoke. They meant to say $1 million, but they said $2 million. Or they mixed up a person's name. They can ask for that to be corrected, and then the official version will represent what they meant to say, not what they actually said. There's also, at least for Australian Federal Parliament, and then this can vary a lot across where exactly you're looking, at least for Australian Federal Parliament, speech and languages other than English is not actually transcribed, and it's only within the last few years that the fact that speech happened and was not transcribed is like it's not until recently that absence is even recorded. So there's probably a lot of non-English material through the history that just it's gone. And there's also some interesting examples where the record is censored for various reasons related to a lot of different issues, mostly interpersonal. And I'll leave it at that we have a reference there if you want to look at some of the more sorted examples from different parliaments. Now, so I mentioned briefly that the Parliamentary Library has already scanned and OCR'd all of this data. So let me show you what it looks like according to their search interface. So for me, this is also one of the most interesting parts of this project, because on the one hand, it's excellent. They've done a really good job preparing all of this detail. But if you actually want to use it for any kind of research problem, there's so much more work to be doing. So one of our first kind of starting points, so I'm going to search the House of Representatives and the Senate. You have to know the structure of the parliament to use the search engine properly, unfortunately. If we just wanted, this was one of our first kind of search points. Let's just chuck in the word unparliamentary and we see, oh, there's 4,800 speeches that match unparliamentary. The other kind of example we wanted to look at was withdrawal, because as Simon noted, it wasn't in that example he referred to. The senator was not actually the judgment was not actually made that what he said was unparliamentary. It was implicit in being asked to withdraw the statement. Unfortunately, when we look at that, we see that there's almost 4 times as many. So there's a whole bunch of 10 times as many, nearly 40,000 matches. So on the one hand, this is great. We have a search interface for all of the parliamentary proceedings. On the other hand, if you want to do anything computational, this is a big pain. There's a lot of work to happen. So all of that, like I said, everything there is there. But what I meant, sorry, the one bit I meant to show you, let's go back to unparliamentary. So if we go into this particular example, you can look at one particular snippet of speech. The challenge is that if you look at the entirety of the Hansard and you want to do computational methods, there's about 1.8 million of these individual speeches. They're available in 2 forms. So you can actually get a single PDF, which has the entire day's transcript. This one is nearly 200 pages long. So, and when you try to look at all of them, there's nearly 15,000 sitting days. So if you think about dealing with 15,000 PDFs, all a few hundred pages long, that's already painful. The other option, or the other partial option, is there's an XML version, which is nice and structured, but then you have to deal with XML, and that's a whole different set of challenges to dealing with PDF or individual pages. So that the actual first hard question, despite the fact that all of this material exists, it's all digitized, it's all available under an open license. It took a lot of work just to get everything together into one place to start dealing with it. And the approach we took for this particular set of work, but not what we'll use going forward, was just to scrape all 1.8 million HTML pages just to collect everything in one place and have a consistent thing. Which is not how I'd recommend doing it if you've got any other options, but that was the best one to work with the particular challenges we had. As you may also have noticed in all of these materials, there's a lot of really rich information. So if we look at the top, there is a lot of metadata about each of these individual speeches. So we know for this particular speech, this person is the nominal speaker. But if you look at the actual transcript, there's multiple speakers in the transcript. And there's indications of things like seeking leave to make particular things in cases where there are motions or votes or things like that. They'll also all be recorded in the Hansard. So there's a mixture of textual and procedural information. For the purposes of the work we were aiming to do, we really focused on the whole speech as the procedural context, because from our early examinations of things where questions of what is unparliamentary were raised, it was really difficult to understand what was happening at the small scale, because there was typically patterns of interjection and people going backwards and forwards. So we focused on a larger unit than a lot of linguistic analysis would normally do, just so we can capture more of that procedural range at the cost of losing the fine-grained information about who is actually speaking at a particular point in time. In terms of the dialogue between qualitative and computational approaches, though, that wasn't necessarily that big a problem, because we did recognize that a lot of the time for that kind of fine-grained context, we're going to go back and read the speech anyway. So even if we don't have perfect metadata at the top at our computational level, that's okay, because we'll still get it when we look at it in more specific examples. So to kind of put this into a linguistic context, so I mentioned there's more than 15,000 sitting days, nearly 1.8 million speeches. In terms of linguistic content, that's nearly 1 billion tokens when you actually start to do some kind of computational analysis. We're not going to read 920 million tokens. We're just not. It doesn't matter. Even if we did have all of the funding in the world, I think we'd probably find better things to do with it than sit down and read all of these. So I mentioned in the examples I showed for the search interface, I talked about unparliamentary and withdraw. That was another thing that that was actually our actual starting point as well, apart from the search interface. Once we had all of this data, we started to look at really, I want to say simple, but I would never underestimate word frequency. I feel like everybody wants to jump over and do the fancy analysis, but word frequency is not to be underestimated. So if we look at the frequency of the occurrence, so the number of tokens in this case, of the word unparliamentary by House and by Chamber, and I'll just note that these are numbered in terms of the by the number of the Australian Parliament at that particular time. So there have been 47 parliaments in Australia. The reason we're doing that is because a parliament is more or less the same, approximately the same group of people over its whole time. So it's a useful condense, and also parliaments have uneven numbers of sitting days over time. So it's just useful to be able, it's just a more useful procedural organization which shows you who is in parliament at that particular time. And even just from this frequency over time, we can already say, well, there's more, it seems like there's more discussion of unparliamentary language in our House of Representatives compared to the Senate, except in Parliaments 35 through 39, which raises a lot of interesting questions just from one graph. I don't ever think we fully nailed down what was going on with this, but we'll come back to that later. But for us, this is also a good illustration of the kind of computational, why we need to go backwards and forwards between computational and qualitative methods. It's not enough to say that there's a spike in the use of the word unparliamentary in Senates 35 through 41 and say that's the end of the story, that means something. If we actually want to make an argument about what that means in the context of these things, we need to look at the examples and we need to understand why or how or what is happening that makes this particular group of senates distinctive compared to the entire rest of the history of Australian Parliament. Or to put it another way, like this graph raises questions, it doesn't answer them. Yeah, so, and importantly for us as well, this isn't just you do one and then you do the other and then you call it a day. Like we kind of see this as a more fine, it's an iterative approach, which means that you do smaller, more fine-grained steps. It's not a simple, we do one and then the other, or we do two methods in parallel in a standard mixed methods kind of thinking approach. We use the computational analysis to ask and pose questions that we then address with interpretive approaches. And then we go back and we use the outcomes of those to go back to the computational approaches. Simon.
Okay. So this slide actually kind of repeats what was on the previous one, but just Sam said it before, so now I can say it as well. Yeah, so we want automatic procedures where we can use them, particularly so we can find relevant examples. Then we can do interpretative analysis on those examples and then return for further exploration with computational methods on the basis of those results. And we can keep doing that, maybe for the rest of our lives.
Until we run out of time or there's a special issue deadline.
That's right. Okay, so what kind of standard approaches to working with big bodies of text could we have potentially employed here, and to what extent were they useful? Sam's already shown you a little bit of what simple searching looks like. I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. A fairly obvious If you are at all familiar with these approaches, a fairly obvious one to try would be looking at collocations, which is about the co-occurrence of words, and I'll discuss that a little bit as well. Another possibility is topic modeling, which is a rather more sophisticated technique. I think we're entitled to call it machine learning. It's got some kind of algorithmic content, and I'll explain a little bit about that also shortly and why that probably wasn't much use to us. But the general message I think we'll get across here is that none of these methods actually gave us what we wanted. None of them were giving us easy access to the examples that we could interpret and explore in a lot of detail. So why was that? Let's have another quick look, think about simple searching. My numbers here are slightly different from Sam's because I searched over a different scope, but you get the same idea that just looking at searching for unparliamentary on the Parlinfo interface gets you thousands of hits. Okay, that's better than reading nearly 1 billion tokens of text, but it's still an awful lot of stuff to go through. And it's also important to realize that not all of those will be related to language. There are other things that are unparliamentary besides language. So, okay, we could search for unparliamentary language. That still gets 2,500 hits in Parlinfo. And that's that set phrase, that bigram, as we say, the two words together. And it's quite possible that they might appear separated from one another and be of interest to us. So this kind of basic searching is very limited. Collocations, I said, are about co-occurrence. We've just seen the example of what happens if you search for unparliamentary language as a phrase. That's one way of approaching this problem. Collocations is another way of approaching the problem. Collocation analysis looks for words which occur on either side of your target word in a given span. And we're typically talking about a window of 5 words on either side of your target. The software goes through and tallies up all the occurrences, or all the co-occurrences, and then calculates on the basis of the frequency of the different words in your body of text, your corpus, calculates how often you'd expect them to co-occur in that span anyway. And then if the actual frequency of occurrence is higher than that, you've got interesting information. You're finding that two words tend to co-occur more often than we would expect just on the basis of their frequency in the texts. What do the results of that look like? Well, you can see an example here of some collocates of the word unparliamentary. So this was on the proceedings of the House of Representatives for one parliament to keep it manageable, not huge, not the most enormous body. And you can see what kind of material we get here. We learned that there are a number of words which have occurred close to the word unparliamentary more frequently than we would expect. If you look at the last couple of columns, you can see these are the statistical measures that have been calculated. So there's a log likelihood ratio, which tells you more or less how much information you're getting from this result, and an effect measure, which tells you a little bit about how big that's in the bigger, how big this result is, with how much weight you might put on it. But the other column that's interesting to look at is the frequency column, which is the second column, numbers going rightwards. And that tells you how often these things co-occurred. And you can see some of them co-occurred an awful lot of times, some of them not so many times. You can also see from this that we did not use a stop list when we made this analysis because the words is and of turn up in the high-ranking collocates. How useful, though, was this kind of information for us? Next one, Sam, thanks. So you could see that most the interesting collocates there mostly were about language relating to unparliamentary, which was interesting, but very general information. So words like expression and withdrawal were there as high-ranking collocates, but are they useful bases for further search? Withdraw, probably not, because it can be used in other contexts. Expression, well, that's going to turn up all over the place. So this is not really giving us a lot of insight as to where to go next. And I've got the example there, remark had 64,000 hits in Parlinfo. So again, this kind of technique wasn't giving us a good entry into the data. The other technique I'm going to talk about briefly is topic modeling. Mainly, I'm going to talk about why we didn't even try it. But just to give you a little bit of background, topic modeling, which is sometimes referred to as LDA, latent dirichlet allocation, this is a technique where you have a body of text, a collection of documents. Okay, you can't have just one huge undifferentiated chunk. It needs to be split up in documents. The technique was originally developed for people who were trying to retrieve information from documents. They wanted to know what documents were about and whether they were interested in them. So that's starting point. You've got a collection of documents. Then you have to give the algorithm as an assumption that there are a certain number of topics which you're looking for. And on the basis of that, because it's got a finite number of topics that it's working with, the algorithm can then work through the co-occurrences of words and assign words or see the probability of words belonging to topics. And what you end up with at the end of this process is two probability distributions, one of which tells you how probable it is that any word belongs to a given topic, and the other one that tells you how probable it is that any document belongs with a given topic. The way that people typically use this technique, they end up with lists of, say, 10 or 15 or 20 words, which are the most prominent words in a topic. And that's when the fun starts, because you have to look at them and decide whether they make any sense. And in some cases they do, and in some cases they don't. There's a certain kind of, well, you can adjust the number of topics and try again and see if you get more coherent results. But sometimes it just doesn't tell you very much. Sometimes it does. So why was this not probably not a good approach for us to even think about? There are a few reasons. First, we have next slide, please. First one, there probably was a question about what the unit of analysis should be, whether the speeches were suitable as a basis or whether we might have wanted to go for whole days or whole parliaments, or there are various possibilities. Probably we would have wanted to use speech because we were interested in interaction. As Sam already said, you can see some of that within those speech units. But that would have meant we had 1.8 million documents going into the analysis, which is quite a lot. Another issue that would have come up is that the target word is not actually very prominent. It's not a very common word, and there's no guarantee that it's going to come in the top 10 or 15 words in a topic. It might have done, but I personally, my intuition is that it probably wouldn't. You might still have got some information, though, from finding out that which documents had some association, say for the topic that had that word most prominent, which documents had most relationship to that topic. It might have given us some clues, but I'm not sure that they would have been very strong. There is also the possibility here of using a technique which is called seeded topic modeling, where you, instead of just giving the algorithm a number of topics, you also tell the algorithm some words that you think should feature in a topic. I'm not quite sure how we would have applied that if we tried to do it, because you usually need a set of words to use as a seed, and we basically had one. Okay, we were starting to get some ideas about what some other words might have been that went in there, but it was still a bit dodgy. And because also that would still be tricky because the key word we're interested in is quite low salience. And on top of all this, which kind of is another nail in the coffin, as we'd say, running an LDA analysis over nearly 1 billion tokens in possibly 1.8 million documents takes some computational resources. I wouldn't like to, like, obviously it depends on what machine you're working on. I think on my laptop, we'd be talking hours. Sam, do you have any thought about that?
Probably even more than that.
Yeah. And as I said, we'd probably have needed to do it a couple of times, playing with different numbers of topics and so forth. And yeah, it would have been really time consuming.
Yeah, I would not have wanted to experiment with seeded approaches with daily turnaround for new results. That's not
Yeah.
amenable to experimentation.
Yeah. So none of those approaches seemed particularly promising. Fortunately, Sam was working on something else in the background.
Yeah, so the starting point for our computational analysis at the highest, most zoomed out level, taking into account all of the things that Simon just said about the various kinds of approaches. We didn't do just one thing. This is just where we started at the most coarse-grained level. So the first is we use speeches as the unit of analysis for the computational method. So we're dealing with roughly 1.8 million documents. Rather than trying to do a full probabilistic topic model approach, we used an approach I've been working on for a while, which is actually much simpler, which is to take words and cluster them in the same way you might cluster documents, with a couple of tweaks to account for some differences between how things, because sorry, I just completely lost all of my words because I said words too many times. So we cluster words based on their co-occurrence in speeches. So if a word like apple and a word like banana occur in similar sets of speeches, they're related in some way. So we're using a very, very coarse-grained notion of similarity between these. Importantly, unlike conventional topic models, the output of this is just lists of words. It is like, it's not a probability distribution, it's just a bucket of words. And when you have a bucket of words, it's really easy to start doing more complicated things with the outputs of them, like rearranging, filtering, inspecting, deciding you don't like one of them and you want to cut them in half and do something different. So our actual first layer, so what this looks like in practice, so this is just a proof of concept user interface. This is the output of this approach over the entire 1.8 million documents. They use a lot of words and a lot of different words. So when you do this kind of clustering, it's really some of these, these are also organized by frequency from matching the most number of speeches to the least number of speeches. So I didn't even remove all the punctuation, let alone the stop words, and they all got grouped together into this not at all useful thing. But as we go further down the list, we start to get more and more specific, detailed things. So on the left-hand side, we have a bunch of time markers because they do actually have timestamps in the data set, and they do refer to times like we will break for lunch at 1:45. And on the right-hand side, we start to see this, from what I know about Hansard, looks like people, so conflict, integrity, behavior, honesty, says something. So this could be a starting point. It's not quite relevant for the actual question we have, so I'm not going to dive into it. The way we actually use this in the context of this project, though, is that this gives us a basis to start reorganizing everything by similarity to our probe term. So if we start with unparliamentary in this context, then we can start to look at all of the words that are all the words with similar sets of documents to documents containing the word parliamentary. And this gives us a much more nuanced understanding of what unparliamentary might mean and how it might be used. Combined with, on the left-hand side, we have concordances on the one hand, but also if we really want to go into the detail, we can look at the full context of the speech and understand what's going on. So the final analysis actually looks a little bit different, so I'm not going to spend too much time going through these, but you can see that this starts to break it down along a few different levels. So this first one is about the procedural context of unparliamentary, like withdrawing and remarks are very much the bread and butter of unparliamentary discussions about unparliamentary language in Parliament. The second one is about lies and not being truthful, which seems to be one of the surest ways to have somebody complain about you being unparliamentary is to call them a liar in Parliament. And so on. And I'm going to talk, so I'll go back to the slides because we have a few more. Sorry, and I'll just re-emphasize, this is not the whole analysis. This is just where we started trying to unpick what might unparliamentary language mean? What are the dimensions of unparliamentary language? So if we do actually break it down, we went through and annotated and looked at concordances from the top 50 of these clusters associated with unparliamentary, just to give us that kind of depth across the whole data set. So this first one is very much, these first two are kind of the very much procedural constraints around unparliamentary, because one of the most uncommon interactions is somebody calls someone a liar, one politician calls another a liar, another politician complains that's unparliamentary, the speaker asks them to withdraw that unparliamentary remark. So those become like this doesn't necessarily get to the meat of what we're interested in terms of the meta-pragmatics of unparliamentary, but it does place it in the procedural context. Like there is an umpire or a person who can make procedural decisions to intervene. The other interesting thing, 418 is actually a reference to one of the standing orders at one particular point in time. So despite the fact that it's just a magic number, it is actually quite meaningful in context, but you have to go back and look up the history and look at some of the speeches to figure that out. The second kind of layer with different types of unparliamentary language. So as I mentioned before, calling one politician calling another a liar, or implying that they misled Parliament, or saying that they're dishonest, or making any other personal characterization of them not being completely truthful is generally one of the fastest ways to get called up as unparliamentary. And that goes along with the allegations and accusations and innuendos. The other two we thought were quite interesting, one of which Simon will talk about a bit further, is hypocrisy and racism and various, excuse me, various language related to racism and other kind of bigotry. So hypocrisy is interesting because it's calling someone a hypocrite is in many senses almost the same as calling them a liar. And as far as Parliament is concerned, that's also unparliamentary. And that's another rabbit hole where we are trying not to go down, but the data's there. We know it's probably going to be interesting because we think it's also one that's changed over time. Simon will talk more about racism later, but I will also mention that 18C is another magic number. In this case, it is highly salient for the issue of racism because it relates to a particular section of a piece of legislation around hate speech and racial vilification, which has been an on-again, off-again political issue for quite a long time in Australia. Additionally, we have the way politicians characterize unparliamentary language. So firstly, I can characterize the first set of characterizations quite straightforwardly, complaining that I was quiet while you talked, so you need to listen to me as well. It's unparliamentary of you to keep interjecting. Similarly, assertions and using language around asserting various facts is typically tied up into making the argument that a piece of language is unparliamentary. Like if you can successfully argue that politician A is asserting that I'm a liar, that's probably unparliamentary language and will be sanctioned, or they'll be asked to withdraw in some way. Lastly, because they're Australian politicians, they're not allowed to swear. There is actually a few lists of words that they are explicitly not allowed to use, but they still try very hard to be as insulting as possible without crossing the line into unparliamentary. And there's a lot of things that either may look innocuous, but when they're put into the context, you can see that they're being quite insulting. So there are a lot of very unfavorable characterizations of people that really skirt the line. And the reason we're seeing them here is because they probably crossed the line, and their use of that particular language or that characterization of a politician has been contested. So I'll hand over to Simon to talk about racism, as I alluded to.
Sam just showed you that was a group of words that came through in his clustering analysis, words to do with racism, bigotry. There was also misogyny in there, but we'll think about it's more about racism now. We decided this was a really interesting area to look at because it's a concern that's recent. Looking at some of our rough collocation analysis, we could see that the clustering around the idea of lying and hypocrisy and so forth, that went right through the entire record back to 1901. But racism is only a concern much more recently. In fact, if you look at the kind of things people were saying in the Australian Parliament in 1901, they were saying blatantly racist things and nobody was worried. That was absolutely fine. So we thought this would be really interesting to look at to see how a new area of language that might be considered offensive, how it was dealt with procedurally, how it was dealt with metapragmatically. So the first occurrences of these words are not until after 1950, the House of Representatives, 1956, the first time, 1962, first time in the Senate. On the handout, there's for comparison, there's some data from the Google Ngram viewer, which shows a fairly similar pattern, that these words were not common before the middle of the 20th century, and then they start to get used increasingly. As with the frequencies for basic term unparliamentary, you can see there are spikes. These are actually easier to account for in these cases. We have a fair idea what was going on. There were contentious legislative provisions that came up at the times when those spikes occur. Okay, so still we had to find the right examples, to analyze this problem. We wanted not just to see the references to racism, we wanted to see where racism was considered unparliamentary. So what we did was we ran a script over the data which looked for the words racist, racists, and racism, and then looked 200 characters either side of that probe to see whether the word parliamentary or unparliamentary occurred. And I'll come back to why parliamentary is in a second. And that got us a candidate set of 132 instances, and 26 of them were highly relevant. And that's what our analysis ended up being based on. just to give you an idea of kind of false positives, those 100 false positives that we got, and why parliamentary is involved here. It's a fairly well-known problem for certain modes of textual analysis where you're concentrating more on meaning. It's a well-known problem that unparliamentary and not parliamentary are the same thing. And you need to try and pick up both of them, which is why we looked for both parliamentary and unparliamentary. And then we get the kind of false positive as the example that you can see there, where someone is talking about a parliamentary inquiry and racism is mentioned in relation to that. So that's not of any interest to us, right? It's not about unparliamentary language, but it got picked up anyway. But it was easy, because we're only looking at 130 examples, at least it was easy to eliminate those. So what did we find out looking at this? The first thing is that very rapidly there was a consensus amongst the parliamentarians that racist was unparliamentary. And if you look at examples 2 to 4, you'll see a number of, see 3 different instances where a member of one of the houses responds very quickly when the words are used and says, that's unparliamentary. I object to it. The judgments of the chairs, the presiding officers, are a little less consistent, though. In general, they agree that racism is unparliamentary. You can't call someone a racist. You shouldn't talk about it. But you can see in one of the examples, it's allowed. The chair said, well, yeah, probably okay. Not happy, but probably okay. So there's a slight mismatch there, but generally people fairly quickly came to see this as part of the realm of unparliamentary language. And further evidence for that is that all the kinds of tactics that had been developed over the years to make it possible to call someone a liar without calling them a liar directly, all of these kinds of methods turn up with words like racist. So there's an example where instead of saying a single person is a racist, you say the group that they belong to are racists. And that's okay, because you might not actually mean the person you're addressing. They're a member of the group, but maybe they're the non-racist member of the group, but that's fine. Same kind of thing has always been done with accusations of dishonesty. Same thing can be done when you attribute the offensiveness to a policy. It's not necessarily the individual whose speech has been contested who's to blame, it's the policy. And so it's not a personal attack and it's not unparliamentary. And you can even say that the attribute belongs to an expression, to words that were produced, not to the person who produced the words. And notice that's already a metalinguistic strategy that we're talking about. Oh, is there a problem with accessing the handout?
Yeah, I just, when I click, I need to click request access. Maybe it's not for...
Oh,
no,
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, continue. Thank you. Sorry.
Next slide, please, Sam.
I'll update the handout and put a new link in the chat.
Thanks. Okay, so we also found that it was very clear that the participants in these interactions were referring to metapragmatic knowledge. They were using the kinds of acts that we would associate with metapragmatic contestation. So we get reproach, someone actually saying, you know that it's unparliamentary. That's part of what you know already. That's your metapragmatic knowledge. And similar to that, denial, that there's a transgression alleged, but it's not actually there. So it's something that we can make judgments about. We have knowledge about this and we can make judgments about it. So this is the example where the chair says, I won't rule it unparliamentary. It's unfitting, but it's not unparliamentary, which is a very subtle distinction, I think. You can make accusations. You can tell someone that it's entirely unparliamentary to do this, to say something. So these are the kinds of ways in which people are showing that they have internalized pragmatic knowledge that they can refer to in these debates. And just as a kind of added layer on top of that, we have examples where people actually start talking about what is unparliamentary language really explicitly. And the final example on the handout is from quite a recent debate in the Parliament about standards of conduct, which has this really amazing sequence that happens. We don't have it all in there, but we have the crucial section about talking about unparliamentary language. The backdrop to what happened is that this was a debate about standards of conduct. A senator made remarks which were deemed to be racist. They were not an attack on another member of Parliament, but the content was deemed to be racist, and that person was required to withdraw those remarks. But then not long afterwards, another senator referred to that first senator as a racist. The person whose language had been judged to be racist and that language had been required to be withdrawn, but it was unparliamentary to call them a racist. And the senators, if you look through this example, they are talking about how that can be possible, how those kinds of meta-pragmatic judgments can be made about these two separate events and how you can try and make sense of it, which is a fairly reflective, sophisticated level of discussion of the issues. Okay, Sam, back to you. Wrap.
Yeah, so just to wrap things up quickly with a few things we're interested to do next. So one of the things is to just make this data. There's a lot more we can do with this data, particularly when we can go down to the level of who is saying what, because by looking at the procedural context, we know who was meant to be speaking, but not who was actually speaking for a particular word or phrase. I'm working more on the clustering method and making that more accessible and easy to run, and not just stuff that I know how to do, but not anybody else. As I alluded to, we are interested in that hypocrisy cluster, and we think it'll be interesting to look at that, but we're not sure how far down, how many of these things do we want to trace down, because the more you look, the more things you find. We're still not completely sure what happened in the Senate 36, apart from an impression that there's a strongly gendered behavior coming about, but we haven't dived any further into that, so I don't want to say any more in case we're completely wrong. And lastly, it's not quite completely off the blocks yet, but we are trying to get a research infrastructure project off the ground in Australia called the RAPID, or Reusable and Accessible Public Interest Documents Project, which is kind of trying to make basically most of the things we've been talking about. So access to Hansard, applying computational methods. We're trying to get all of this to a state where other people can do it, not just us in the context of this research project. And we're hoping to get an Australian government and university funded project off the ground to make all of this easier, not just for Hansards on parliamentary proceedings, but we're also looking at submissions to public inquiries, we hope. Importantly, and I think this kind of nicely slides into the initial discussion about setting up digital humanities, we're hoping that this will be a center, not just yes, we'll be focusing on Australia, but we also really want to make sure all the methods and approaches we're doing are well documented so other people can apply them too. So it has more impact than just what we do here, but also around the world, because there's a lot of good work that can happen if we solve some of the data access issues around these. Thank you.
I just
just
throw in, sorry,
go ahead.
Picking up on what Sam was just saying, if you are interested in these questions, we are hosting a webinar in about a month's time from the leaders of a project in the European Union, which has been looking at parliamentary proceedings as data sources. There's details on our website, and I'll put that link in the chat in a second.
Okay. Thank you, Sam and Simon, for very talk, because I believe we still want to have that humanistic and qualitative aspects in our analysis here in the faculty, and also when we do some kind of language analysis. So this is a very useful example to share to colleagues here who attend, and also to doctoral students who also are doing research about language, just to show that qualitative analysis is still insightful despite rapid development of technological tools. So I would like to invite, if there are questions from participants to Sam and Simon, feel free to ask directly, or if you want to write down in the chat, you can also do so. And meanwhile, there is URL for getting in touch with this project, the DACA project that Sam and Simons are involved, and also link for today's participation. Okay, any question? I have several questions, actually. We still have several questions. Okay, let me begin. So is there any tools that your project have created, tool to do this kind of analysis with text, or it is like custom made tool? I mean,
associated with it,
yeah, open tools.
yeah, associated with our project, there's I suppose there's another project in a sense at University of Queensland, which is called LADAL, Language Data Analysis Laboratory. I missed something in there, I think. But anyway, that has extensive online materials giving introductions to most of the basic techniques in text analysis and some other statistical techniques. Then our project has also created a small number of specialized tools, which currently are most easily accessed at a website called the Australian Text Analytics Platform. For example, there's a tool there that you can use to identify quotations within texts. And there's tools for comparing two collections of documents to see if you have duplicates, or sorry, a collection of documents to see if you have duplicates in there and get rid of them. There's a couple of others there as well that you might be interested to look at.
Oh yeah, see the link. Yeah, in case people here are interested in doing similar kind of textual analysis with using the corpus that they are gathering. So yeah, thanks for sharing the link. Is there any other questions from participants? Okay. There is I don't see. But another question that, sorry, Simon and Sam, I have several questions to ask because I'm a bit curious. So for this clustering thing, is it as a result of the topic modeling or this clustering that you talk about, the last one before resist, is different technique? The
I would say it's inspired by topic modeling
okay.
because partly noticing that I think the thing that people really like about topic models is the table of word probability weights and the top 10, top 20. Not so much the specific numbers assigned to each word, but just the ranking and the ordering. And there's some benefits to not doing all of the complicated parts of topic modeling and just grouping the words into buckets because it makes computational life a lot simpler. So for reference, the actual clustering part of the analysis, instead of the hours, days we were talking about, it's like 10 minutes, which
Okay.
is much nicer. And because it's just a bucket of words, you can if you
Yeah.
don't like the results, you can change them easily because it's much easier to split a bucket of words in half than it is to edit a probability distribution.
Okay.
And I should mention in the context of the last question as well, it's still a while off, but I am working on making a toolkit that's more accessible for doing all of that. I'm not very good at building user interfaces, so it's slow.
Oh, is that the web page that you show with the local host?
Yep. So there will be, hopefully later this year, there'll be a notebook version of that you can run in the cloud or install locally and
That's
work
nice.
through
So,
your own data.
yeah, so that means if that is available in the future, we can use our own text. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because of course this is new as a context here. We teach corpus linguistics for doctoral students here, and we only reach until collocation analysis so far using NCON tool. And I think is that the results of your table, Simon, with the collocates? Is that from NCON?
Yeah, I think it probably was.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was. It was. Sorry. Yeah.
So yeah.
Exported from Hancock.
Okay. Yeah. So that's basically the digital aspect that we do here. So this is a bit broader than your topic, talking about digital humanities. So we teach COCA for undergrad students in my department, and we teach ANCON for doctoral students, and also a bit of R just for the statistics, not for, I believe, wrangling that text so that you get resist either preceded by our parliamentary and also followed by parliamentary. Is that a regex situation?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, like my dean said, we really don't know what this digital humanities initiative is going to be, but um, in the future, I think if it is about to be a course, maybe I will ask you both if that is okay. Asking for feedback. I know Simon has taught this
Course.
at Monash before, so because we have other departments, not just language, like archaeology and anthropology, um, and history, and we will have that bit of departments for the next talk in the second half of this year. So in case later on you have contact or experience about digital project for non-language related side like history or archaeology, I would be happy to hear from you if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I'll just wait if there is other question. So there is no more question. I mean, there is no question from the participant. Maybe they just want to learn. I believe because we still have a kind of confusion where does computation comes in and where it ends in our area, like in language, for instance, because there is still a tension about quantitative and then computational, and language is just qualitative and so on. So I think maybe they just want to see how it is applied in the context of your research questions. And I hope there will be more questions in the future. Yeah.
I understand that. I can understand that we covered a lot in quite a short time, and it may be that it will only be in the next couple of days that people might realize they have questions.
Yeah.
And we will make the slides available to you, and they include our email addresses, and please feel free to get in touch if you do have questions.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's all questions I have. So I'm really looking forward to see the outcome of your project. Hopefully the toolkit, and also other tools that you produce from the project. And as a closing, I would like, as a token of appreciation, to share, this is Indonesian style, sorry, a certificate of you as a presenter. I think somebody will help, yeah, from the media, for participating in this DigiTalk series. To Simon, thank you very much for your time. And then there is another one for Sam as well. I'll email you this.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. That's for Sam. Thank you, Sam. It's good to meet you, meet
You're
you
welcome.
via Zoom. Hopefully we can meet in person. So I would also like to say thank you for the participants who are still in the room. Could we turn on the camera? This is another thing that I need to do, to take a picture for the news, for the faculty news. Mungkin Ibu Bapak bisa hidupkan kamera sebentar. So there are not only from our faculty for the participant, Simon, there are also from outside faculty. All right. Mungkin yang dari media bisa bantu foto ya, teman-teman media FIB. Okay, whatever we have in this room, can we just take a picture? I don't know how long will we need to wait for them. Bisa dibantu dari tim media?
1, 2, 3. One
Okay.
more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, media, and thank you everyone for attending this talk, and especially Simon and Sam. Have a good day. Take care. I hope to see you in person, Simon, and also Sam.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes, me too.
Yes.
Before we sign off, Sam, are we okay with distributing the recording? Yeah. Yeah. That's
Oh, yeah,
there's no reason. That's fine.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, apparently it's streaming on YouTube. So it will be recorded on YouTube, but because you said it's okay, so it will be made public. That's the idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your consent on that. So see you in the next DigiTalk for everyone, and I hope to see you both, Simon and Sam, in Australia maybe. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.